Welcome to the HLA and GeoPoll webinar. I can see the attendees are starting to come through now. The numbers are building, so we'll just wait a little moment until everybody arrives. My name is Nicola Webb, and I am the trustee and commercial director of the Humanitarian Logistics Association. This is the 5th in our series of monthly webinars, and if you keep your eyes on the regular newsletters that we send out, you will see that we have got others coming up. We've just unfortunately had our June slot. The speaker couldn't make it, so I'm scurrying around to fill the June slot, but we have got September and October, November webinars planned, so they will be coming at you very soon. Okay, attendee numbers are slowly building, so I shall just keep talking for a little longer. We should, looking at the registration list, we had about 70 people registered, but I'm expecting probably fewer than half of those typically to attend on the day. But the attendees are globally, they're registered globally. We've got from Tehran to Norway, Global South, you name it. And special thanks and apologies go to anybody who's in the West Coast or Midwest America. You can imagine, with a global audience, we try and pick a time which will cover a lot of bases, but it does mean that anybody in the US has a very early start. So apologies to that, and apologies also to Scott, who's going to be answering questions later on, who is one of those people based in the US. Jocelyn, who you can see on screen, Jocelyn Williams, is from GeoPoll, and she is our speaker today. The format will be that Jocelyn will speak for about 20 to 25 minutes with slides, so she will switch her video off at that point. I will be running a short poll, and once Jocelyn starts, I will set the poll running, which is 4 questions with multiple choice answers, and you can answer those, if you would, any time as you go along. I'll run the poll for about 15 minutes, and then I'll close it down, and then we can see the end results from everybody. When Jocelyn finishes, we will switch back on our videos, all of us, and we will answer your questions. To ask questions, as I said in the attendee email, if you hover your mouse down the bottom of your screen, you should see a little envelope with Q&A, a Q&A button, and all you need to do is to press on that and type in your question, and we will receive that, and we, as I say, I will moderate that, and we will answer the questions at the end. All attendees will be muted, so we can't hear any background noise from you, and once we start any minute now, I will mute myself as well. The webinar is being recorded as we speak, and within about an hour after it ends, Zoom finishes processing the recording and sends me a link, which I will send out to all of those who attended and all of those who registered. And it'll also be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and I'll give you details on that in the email, so you can either look at the recording later or share it with colleagues and so on. Okay, well, we're a little slow on attendee numbers, but I'm hoping that more will come online. And in the meantime, what I'll say is that's enough from me, and I will hand over to Jocelyn now, who can share the slides.
Fantastic, thank you. So I will stop sharing my video for a moment and bring up the slides instead for the presentation. So hopefully everyone can see the slides up at the moment, and everyone can also hear me okay.
Yes, Jocelyn, just to say, can see and can hear.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, thank you so much to HLA for having us here from GeoPoll. As you know, this webinar is we're going to talk about, let's get rid of that on the screen. We're going to talk about GeoPoll's experience in how to successfully conduct surveys using mobile phones in Africa. So just to briefly let you know the overview of what we'll be covering. We'll be talking, I'll give a very brief sort of background about GeoPoll, just to sort of contextualize the learning that we'll be sharing today, so that you can sort of understand where it's come from. We'll also talk briefly about a couple of case studies which will practically illustrate the power of mobile phones, particularly focused on different logistics challenges, so that we can see, you know, why is it that we're actually using mobile phones for surveys and what can be achieved when they're done successfully. And then we will talk through some of the challenges specifically and the specific lessons learned that we have found in terms of overcoming those challenges. So some of the previous uses that mobile phone surveys have been used for is sort of collecting a very, very wide range of data, and a few which particularly focus more on the logistics side you can see here. So from assessing markets to infrastructure to transportation, particularly in hard to reach locations, if that's because they are conflict affected or geographically hard to reach, mobile can be a really, really effective way of rapidly getting information from those hard to reach areas. Some of the case studies that we'll be talking through in a moment, one of them talks about the use of mobile phone surveys to implement rapid emergency humanitarian assessments, so the needs assessments that can feed into the planning which goes around logistics. The other case studies we'll be talking about focus also on monitoring sort of the end use of goods by users and using this to manage the supply chain, and also looking at impact evaluations and the role that mobile phone surveys can play in this. And another key aspect that we often use mobile phone surveys for is sort of tracking, monitoring community perceptions and behaviour change. So this really linking into looking at the impact of what's happening on the ground and then adapting programs accordingly. So very briefly, just to contextualize what we're going to see today, GeoPoll is a leading research organisation. We use mobile phones to gather direct real-time feedback from communities across the developing world, across Africa, Asia, the Middle East, Caribbean, and parts of Central and South America, as you can see from this map here of countries where we have already completed work. We use mobile phones to enable two-way communication between aid providers and affected populations, and this enables organisations to track and improve their effectiveness, accountability, and impact. The scale that we're talking about here, you can see here that we do over 10 million interviews every year. We have millions of subscribers and respondents on our databases, which we'll talk about later. And in particular, we try and focus on the sort of lower socioeconomic groups, and we generate this data to enable data-driven decision-making, which links into sort of a lot of adaptive programming as well. So regularly being able to see what's happening on the ground and adapting programs around that for program management. The last thing I'll say on GeoPoll, but again, just to sort of contextualize what we're going to see in a moment, we work with both commercial and international development organizations. Myself, my colleague Scott, who are both on the call here from GeoPoll, we focus exclusively on the international development side. These are some of the organizations that we work with and have worked with, and you can see here a wide range of donors, international development consultancies, NGOs, research organizations, universities. So just to let you know, again, these are the sort of work that has fed into these lessons learning, and these are the sorts of organizations we've worked with which has fed into these lessons learned. Very briefly, before we talk about the specific case studies related to logistics, I just wanted to touch base briefly on why we choose to do data collection through mobile phone surveys. We'll talk about each of these in a bit more detail, but as you can imagine, the fact that it is, we're able to do real-time actionable data, the fact that we're able to get real-time data back so quickly, mobile phone survey data is also very easily scalable and can be done in local languages easily as well. It's very low risk compared to face-to-face interviews, and we're able to obviously target by demographic, which I'll talk about shortly. There are multiple different modes that can be used for mobile phone surveys, and this is one of the ways that it's possible to access it for different populations. So for example, populations with low literacy. And also there's, because it's digitized, it's very efficient to have good data quality control mechanisms in place. And all of this feeds into the value for money argument about scalability, speed, risk, leading into value for money. So I'm just going to touch briefly on 3 case studies before I talk about the challenges specifically and the lessons learned, just to sort of give an indication of, when done successfully, what can surveys using mobile phones bring, particularly focused on logistics and particularly focused on Africa. So the first example is HIV self-testing kit tracking, which was done in Kenya. So an NGO had distributed HIV self-testing kits to adolescents, and each of these kits had on them a unique ID number and also a GeoPoll dedicated short code. This short code phone number enabled interested recipients to text in for free to the short code, so they could opt in to take product satisfaction surveys, and these were done immediately and then again 2 weeks later. And so this was enabling direct feedback on product satisfaction from the end user, which was then fed back into future iterations of the HIV self-testing kit. The second key case study is focusing on challenges with long-lasting insecticide-treated nets, the distribution and usage in Kenya. So for this example, GeoPoll surveyed 200 nurses and 3,900 community members across all the 13 counties in Kenya. And we were asking about their perceptions on distribution problems related to the nets. This survey feedback informed training that was then given to nurses and to net recipients. And this was to increase the efficient distribution and the correct usage by the end users. So again, this direct feedback feeding into increasing program efficiency and effectiveness. And the final case study example is a rapid humanitarian needs assessment that GeoPoll did in Mozambique in response to the cyclone. This was a self-funded effort by GeoPoll because we wanted to support the humanitarian community in their efforts. And you can see the link here to the website where we have the dashboard and all of the data, which is available for free. And this was shared out to humanitarian responders at the time to support their efforts. We were able to survey 700 respondents who spoke on behalf of household members, which was totaling almost 5,000 individuals. So we had 700 direct responses, and within their households there were almost 5,000 individual people. Each of them had been directly affected by the cyclone, and we gathered information on the ground about infrastructure damage, food security, the aid that was being received, the aid that was most needed. And you'll just see here, to touch on the timeline, the speed with which this can happen. It was within a number of days, and it was within hours of sending out the initial survey that we got responses from people. And we got these 700 responses within about 24 hours of sending out the survey. So again, the speed and scalability really comes into play here in the humanitarian setting. And if you go onto the website, this is what you'll be able to see, the dashboard that we've created. This is normally how we feed information back in this sort of dashboard format, just to give you a visual representation of how the data that comes from these mobile surveys can be filtered, can be represented and portrayed. So I'll now speak about the specific challenges that can come when doing successful surveys, mobile phone surveys, and the specific lessons learned that we have found in our experience from doing millions of these surveys ourselves. So the first challenge, which is a key priority, is targeting specific groups. Sometimes it's useful to be able to target general population, to be able to track perceptions and behaviours and different maybe prejudices and ideas around things, but also it's very important to be able to target down into certain focus groups. The way that we have learned to do this successfully, the first way is by having a database of mobile numbers to be used. So we have our own database at GeoPoll, which we've built up based on this lessons learned, of 250 million mobile subscribers. 5 million of whom we've also got additional information which we've collected over the years. So that this allows us to pre-target even before we send out the surveys, pre-target based on, for our database, for these 5 million, age, gender and location data. So if we wanted to speak to women in a certain age group in the northeast of Congo, for example, this is where having the database of mobile numbers is very, very effective to really target down. Another way of doing this as well is using a client database as well. So particularly there's a particular beneficiary list, for example, people who've particularly been impacted by a specific program. That is another important database that can be used. Of course, sometimes on the database, we will have a certain number of people, but we may also need to recruit new participants. So one of the lessons learned that we found in terms of participant recruitment is really using different media and outreach strategies to recruit participants. So for example, when we did new participant recruitment for our panel of farmers in Kenya, we were able to create this panel of 13,000 farmers, and many of them were recruited via TV and radio campaigns, which we did, and through those we promoted a number which could be texted into, similar to the example we saw earlier of the HIV self-test tracking kits. On these TV and radio campaigns, we shared this this text message number, and people could text in for free to self-nominate to be on the panel. And then from there, we did some additional questions to categorize them into the panel. So that's a lessons learned in terms of how to recruit the new participants. Once a survey has been sent out, another key lessons learned is that once a survey has been sent out, we can then do additional screening by using screening questions. So questions within the survey to identify whether people fit into additional criteria, for example, household income level. The second key challenge is the technological and potential language barriers. Obviously working globally and with different regional languages, sub-regional languages, and different technological literacy levels. So one of the first things we do is for our first lesson learned is to always implement the survey in the local language. And so GeoPoll has conducted surveys in over 45 different languages so far. The digital nature of mobile phone surveys makes it particularly efficient to be able to translate back and forth both the survey and then the answers. The bigger way that we are able to overcome some of the different barriers is by using the most effective mode. So as I mentioned earlier, there's actually lots of different modes that can be used on mobile phones. And so they will help us to target different audiences. So depending on who you want to reach and what you want to ask will really determine what sort of mode is going to be most effective. This slide just talks about the different modes that can be used on mobile, using GeoPoll's learning as the example here. So these are the different modes that we use and that we found really effective. You'll see the first one is SMS. So these are two-way SMS text messages. We text a question and then the participant texts back an answer. And those are particularly good when there's a certain level of literacy, when the questions are quite quantitative, when you're really looking for sort of speed and scale. That can be a very effective method. We also have here mobile web. So if the population that you want to reach out to has some level of connectivity to the internet, for example, we can send out SMS text messages which have a link to a mobile web survey. I'll just touch on the ones on the bottom. We have mobile app and market research online communities. So again, for those community members who have maybe more technologically advanced phones with WhatsApp, with mobile app, that's a method that can be used as well. Obviously, most of the people who we want to be focusing down on don't have this high level of sort of technological capability. So that's where the SMS is extremely important. And also the other key method that we use, which is this computer-assisted telephone interviewing. So this is using local call centers who are using the GeoPoll systems and processes and the GeoPoll enumerator app, and having those enumerators phone people and ask them questions. And this is especially good for low literacy populations and for qualitative questionnaires. We also recognize that if a person doesn't have a mobile phone, obviously they cannot be targeted remotely through a mobile phone. And so face-to-face is also, we appreciate, an important method of working, but we also want to bring in the mobile tech into this methodology as well. So one of the other ways, one of the other lessons learned we've had in terms of how to use mobile tech is computer-assisted in-person interviewing. So similar to the telephone interviewing is we have enumerators who would use the GeoPoll app, and that would be via face-to-face interaction, whereas with the telephone interviewing, it's using the GeoPoll app and having people phoning up with a voice call. I'll just very quickly show an example of how the app can be used for the in-person interviewing, because this is often something that people sort of want to visually see in order to get their minds around it. So here's an example, and the beauty of this is that it has the benefits of the face-to-face model. It also has the benefits of using the most advanced mobile tech. So the fact that data collection can be very rich, any kind of question, video, picture content, etc. The app also allows for geolocation and also has offline capabilities, because of course many of the areas we're going to won't have online coverage. So these surveys can be preloaded onto the enumerator's device using the app, conducted in areas with no network, and then uploaded automatically once the network connectivity is available. So the key learning there, as I've mentioned, is really choosing which mode is going to be the best mode to use for your particular audience, for your particular question. And that's a key lesson that GeoPoll has learned, and we've invested in accordingly. The next key challenge is time commitment. So obviously the people who we're surveying, it's a commitment of their time in order to answer our questions. And so we need to be very cognizant of that and very respectful of that. The key lesson learned that we have found is limiting the length of the interview or the number of questions, because this will obviously ensure high response rates from participants. So at GeoPoll, we have learned to limit the surveys to a maximum of 20 questions per survey. So that would be, for example, 20 questions sent via an SMS. And also to limit it for a 20-minute survey, if it's a voice call, for example. So that 20 questions or 20 minutes, which still gives a large scope to work within, but ensures that response rates remain high. The other key learning is to find a time that suits the respondent, and remote mobile surveys are particularly effective for this, because of course you can call back multiple times and at a convenient time for the participant. So normally at GeoPoll, we will try to contact a respondent maybe 5 times to invite them to participate. And then for live voice calls, they can actually specify when's a convenient time for them to be contacted. And so this is particularly effective, when you're trying to contact, for example, women who will have a lot of different demands on their time throughout the day. And if you can offer them that you can come back at a time that suits them, that's going to really increase response rates. So that's the lessons learned in how we've overcome the challenge of the time commitment. Another key challenge, of course, is economic barriers. If we're going to be targeting people on the lower socioeconomic end of the scale, we don't want there to be any sort of financial barrier to entry for them. So at GeoPoll, most of our surveys are at no cost for the respondent to participate. So our SMS, our voice call, are in person using the app. For the respondent, there is no cost. We're able to do this because of the relationships that we have with mobile network operators in country. So about 85 different mobile network operators globally, we have relationships with. This means that people can participate in our surveys at no cost, even if they have no phone credit. In addition, as a sort of a thank you, for their time commitment and for the commitment they've done to providing us with that data, we are able to award eligible participants, so those who fit the criteria to be eligible to participate and who complete the survey in full, with mobile phone credit top-up directly. This is normally around 50 US cents in local credit, so a small amount, but a really great thank you. And again, we're able to do that because of those relationships with the mobile network operators, and those really enable us to overcome and reduce any potential economic barriers to entry for participants. Another key challenge is the requirements of the mobile network operators themselves, and also national legislation around mobile surveys. This will really depend on the mobile network operator, depending on the country, the region. It's often changing, and so really the key lesson learned is to always be ahead in terms of knowing what those are, and that's something that GeoPoll has put a lot of time and effort into understanding and knowing the best way and what the different aspects are that we need, the hoops we need to jump through, so that this then doesn't impact, for example, the survey implementation timelines. So really knowing this in advance, being up to speed with this is a really important lesson learned. And just the last two challenges, the first one being duty of care. Duty of care has always been a huge priority to GeoPoll. The people who we are talking to or we're surveying, we are asking a whole range of questions, some of which are extremely sensitive. For example, we've done surveys on gender-based violence, HIV/AIDS, LGBTQI communities. So we really appreciate the sensitivity of the questions we're asking around, for example, around maybe incidents of violent extremism or perceptions around that. So for us, duty of care has always been a huge priority. One of our big priorities, which we've really learned a lot about, is the security of participants. So when we design a survey, we will do it in partnership with a client, and we will always talk about and be cognizant of the language that is used in the survey. Is it sensitive cultural norms, and does it limit any potential risk? Are we using, avoiding inflammatory language, avoiding potentially risky language, and making it so that it's clear for the participants to know what we're asking, but making it safe for them to do so. Another key aspect is, of course, the consent for participants. So before each survey, GeoPoll will contact participants, inviting them to participate, explaining the purpose of the survey, and we will gain consent from them. All surveys are opt-in, and participants can opt out at any time. And lastly, data security. So it's very, very important to already have in place robust data protection mechanisms before carrying out any survey. For example, at GeoPoll, all of our data, and when we share mobile numbers, is always encrypted. And within our own systems, we have a cross-referencing system that separates participants' phone numbers from their survey answers. So it adds another layer of security. So that's a really important lesson learned, is having that in place. And just the final challenge before I wrap up is to have in place, so for to ensure data quality management throughout the process, is to have in place, in advance of implementing any survey, systems which will automate and monitor the data in real time. So because it's a very fast process of getting the data back, the data really needs to be monitored in real time so that it can be analysed and then any potential issues resolved immediately. So at GeoPoll, we've obviously invested a lot in internal systems and processes, and also our enumerator apps, which allows us to analyse, monitor and resolve these issues in real time. The second key learning being enumerator training. So for both voice calls and in-person interviews, the enumerators that we use, we put a lot of time and effort into training and giving them very comprehensive training. This includes things like data security, ensuring consent, limiting bias in questions, and data quality, so that they can really make the most of the technology that we have. And finally, our spot checks. So for GeoPoll, our learning has been our operations team and also our enumerator managers, which we will always have on hand, complete regular spot checks of the data and survey implementation during the data collection process. And so again, this helps us to monitor and resolve issues in real time to ensure the quality of the data that's coming through. So in conclusion, with the right knowledge and expertise, surveys via mobile phones can be a really powerful tool, both to gather real-time data and direct feedback from communities. But as we've explored today, there is a lot that goes into it, a lot of sort of key lessons learned to overcome those potential challenges and to make sure that things are done quickly, efficiently, and to a very high quality. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jocelyn. That was great and very clearly presented. So thank you very much. I've shared the poll, everyone, on the screen. We haven't got any questions in yet, so you've obviously done a brilliant job of answering every possible question. But I'm hoping that people won't be shy, and there might be a few questions coming up. But in the meantime, if we just have a quick look at the poll results together. So the majority of those that answered, well, actually, it was nearly half and half. So 43% said yes, they had experience of doing surveys via text messages. I'd be interested to know if anybody wants to use the Q&A, what those purposes were for. I'm guessing it might be fundraising or donor advocacy, but if I'm wrong, please let me know, people that are out there, what you used your surveys for. 57%, so slightly the majority, said no, they hadn't had any experience of this. Based on organisations' needs, what were the following values which were most important? And a clear winner there was speed of data collection. Secondly was access, hard to reach areas and populations. Question 3, what interests you most about it? Innovative solutions, the fact that it is an innovative piece of technology, which I agree with. When I first came across GeoPoll, I just thought it would be simple SMS text messaging. I didn't realise that they had all the interactivity that Jocelyn has talked about today. And second highest interest is accessing hard to reach areas and populations. And the final question, what concerns you most about these surveys? And access, again, so interest in reaching the hard to reach populations, but also accessing them and how you actually get at them. I hope that Jocelyn in her talk has actually managed to cover that off. But if not, Jocelyn, you might want to say a little bit more on that, and also on the concern of data quality. So how about we take that at the moment? So access to populations and data quality, those two issues.
Great, absolutely. I might take this moment to introduce my colleague Scott, who's joining us from the DC office. Scott, do you want to put on your video? And perhaps if you wanted to, I'm happy to talk, but perhaps if you wanted to talk first about this, this area of sort of access to specific target populations, would you be happy to do that?
Sure, and let me also answer the question that came in. It's in French, but I was able to navigate it. This is about languages. We offer our surveys in multiple languages, including French and in, of course, local and regional languages. It really is up to what the client's objectives are, and most importantly, who their target audiences are to communicate with. To the point about data access, the most interesting thing about GeoPoll's capacity using various modes is our ability to reach into populations that are notoriously left behind when it comes to engaging people in face-to-face exercises or in online, so modes that require internet access. The SMS can access anybody with any basic phone. You know, phones that are 18 years old can do SMS, does not require internet, does not require a smartphone or a tablet or a laptop or anything like that. And that's what's so incredible about that. And the live call scenario, this is computer assisted, of course, are going to any phone at all. So again, technology as far as internet capable with smartphones is not an issue. We are sensitive to the fact that there are pockets of populations that are, of course, do not have any form of mobile. That number, of course, is constantly shrinking. But we do offer the ability, as Jocelyn said, to do face-to-face interaction when you're wanting to fulfill a particular demographic that is completely offline and completely inaccessible through mobile. But as we're seeing in country after country, the access to basic mobile and of course then access to internet continues to grow. And we found, due to the large scale of surveys that we can send out, we can tap into these populations and get sample sizes that are quite defendable and can be put side by side with more traditional, much more expensive, and much more challenging face-to-face approaches. The last thing I'll say to that is that this is about accessing populations that are not only difficult to physically get to, but difficult to get to due to security concerns, difficult to get to due to issues such as Ebola or remote islands that just are not logistically and not cost-effective able to reach, but we can reach them through mobile.
Okay, thank you, Scott. I think hopefully that answers the question we had in French, well translated, Scott, from Mohammed, and also Hamadoun's question as well. Do we have any other questions from the floor? If not, or while we wait for one to come in, I've got one question for either of you, which is, in my relatively recent experience of the sector, which is only about 2 years now, I find that there's quite a lot of resistance to new technology from NGOs for various reasons. But I'm wondering if that's something you're finding, that there is this, who's going to move first? Who's going to be the early adopter?
Well, maybe I'll field this first. Jocelyn, please fill in. The part of the portfolio that Jocelyn and I work on, we call it the social sector team. And this is a team that is supporting NGOs, contractors, multilateral organizations, donor organizations, academic organizations, foundations in collecting the data they need to monitor, evaluate their populations, to engage their target beneficiary groups, and to understand general population dynamics and interest. We've found over the last 5 to 7 years an increasing expansion of interest on the part of the NGO community, and for a number of reasons. One, there are limited resources, and using mobile can be a very effective value for money proposition in order to access populations where traditional face-to-face models may be prohibitively expensive. We also offer very straightforward methodologies, and we can work closely with our NGO clients to develop and design survey approaches. Jocelyn and I come from the NGO world, so we've worked for many years working with these various organizations, whether they be in project management teams, development teams, operations teams. And this is one of the I think values that she and I bring, is the ability to sit down in a room and we're sitting amongst peers. I'm not coming from a technology standpoint. I'm coming from an NGO's perspective. And so what I've learned over the last few years working with GeoPoll is what we can bring. And the challenge we have is really getting to the right person in the organization who's willing to embrace something that is not necessarily high tech. SMS is not high tech, but is open to a new approach and testing something out in a challenging environment.
Okay, yeah. Jocelyn, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add to that, please. As Scott said, we both come from the international development background. I also have done a lot of humanitarian response in my career as well. I'm working in various conflict and fragile affected states. And the key thing that struck me when I joined GeoPoll, and really the reason why I joined GeoPoll, was how impressed I was by what could actually be achieved. And I find often, one of the things I often encourage clients to do is just ask us the question if it's possible. Because the number of times that a conversation starts with, I'm not sure this would be possible, but, and then we come to a solution, is just amazing. And when I joined GeoPoll, I thought, I wish when I was a project manager and a bid manager and all these different things, I had known more about this tool, because the number of applications that I could see in my own work once I understood how it worked was mind-boggling. GeoPoll has worked in, as you saw from the map, has worked in a huge number of countries. Some of the hardest countries, we've recently done a survey in Somalia, which is on our website if people are interested to have a look. Some of the data is on there. The Mozambique example, in days after a cyclone has hit. We've done surveys in Iraq, Afghanistan, South Sudan. So we've done surveys in some of the most challenging parts of the world. And I think people are constantly surprised by what is actually achievable, because it is so much. Because we're a research organization, we're always very, very clear about the parameters as well. So, you know, we will be very clear about, okay, this is how many people we can reach, and, you know, it won't sort of, you know, we're not promising a silver bullet. You know, we're a research organization. We understand the parameters and the advantages and the challenges and the limitations. So we're always very, very clear. But even within those, I think people are constantly impressed and surprised by what is possible. So time and again, I say to clients, please just ask us a question, because as I said, you know, sometimes clients have come to me and said, we want to do a beneficiary feedback mechanism in South Sudan. Okay, let's talk about it. And we've actually been able to come up with something really robust and really interesting, which has really brought something to the table that others perhaps couldn't do.
Okay, thank you, Jocelyn. Scott, I don't know how your French is standing up, but
I'm reading it. That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and if there's a francophone, please, if there's a need to translate my English. But the answer to Mohammed's question is that yes, NGOs are using various methods to collect data, and that's wonderful. The more important thing is, are they accessing those populations? Are they able to reach their populations in enough frequent way to be able to understand behavior change over time? A classic example, and this was the case of an NGO I worked with several years ago, they would use things like SurveyMonkey, and they'd send out a mass email asking for people to give feedback on a training session. Well, that's fine, and that means you're talking to people that have email accounts, which means you're talking to people that have to have internet access in one way or another. The goal here is to be able to access population using a mobile number that can be collected by an NGO and be able to undertake these surveys on a very regular basis. And the point that Jocelyn made is giving a small phone credit top-up is also an incentive to participate. Surveys, email surveys, and things like SurveyMonkey have notoriously low response rates for many reasons, and one of them is just access and convenience. The other thing I should say on Mohammed's point is that when you get the data, the question is, how are you getting it? So a lot of feedback loops. I've sat in training sessions where a piece of paper was passed around for feedback on a training or recommendations for the future. Okay, that's wonderful. Now you have a stack of paper that needs to be analyzed, put into a system, and then somehow spit back out in the form of report. We can automate that process very, very quickly in live time, allowing NGOs to directly engage their beneficiaries or larger populations and be able to feed that back to their donors very quickly and on a very regular basis without having to go and send out their staff or send out enumerators back into particular populations. The last question that was up was also about the number of questions. So Jocelyn talked about a 20 question max. That is our recommendation. If you can imagine, if you're holding a Nokia phone in your hand and you're answering a survey that goes on and on and on, you're draining your battery life, not to mention your own life, and you want to keep the questions, the number of questions relatively short, not only to fit into, in the case of SMS, into a 160 character limitation, but to make it convenient. You can always go back and have a second survey with that individual or with that population down the road. And again, it's about being convenient. It's about getting a high response rate. We've seen that the longer the surveys are, the more people drop off midstream. And of course, that then skews the data and we can't use an incomplete survey often. And our goal is to, of course, be most responsive. 20 to 25 questions is what we recommend. There have been ones that are longer. We've done live call surveys that have been 45 minutes and 50 minutes long. I'm glad I don't get those surveys because that is a lot of time to commit for anybody. And sometimes you may want to ask yourself, if you're really asking me to do a survey that's that long, that complicated, maybe it needs to be done face-to-face because that's really a deep interview that needs that kind of time and attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if they are looking
Can I just add one point? I just wanted to talk, sort of just to echo what Scott had said on the first point about the work that obviously NGOs already do in this space, but something else to sort of bring into the discussion here, which I touched on quite early on in the presentation, is the value for money and scale. So the scale that we're talking about here, for example, on our website, there's a case study of a survey that we did on people's perceptions around autism in Kenya. And we surveyed 2,000 people. that's, you know, the scale we're talking about here is it 200 people, 500 people, 1,000 people, 2,000 people, more? Is it multiple countries simultaneously? That sort of scale is not cost effective to replicate through face-to-face. And so that's one of the things that really, I think, comes out of this, you know, is the fact that if you want to target quickly, cost effectively, large numbers of people, so that you can have some, you know, some numbers that really resonate perhaps with donors, with governments, with people whose minds you need to change, you know, you can have that data. Scale as well as not only in terms of sort of number of people, but length of time. So building on what Scott said about, you know, when we often do quite a lot of longitudinal studies in terms of how people's lives have changed over the long term as a result of, you know, educational inputs or training or international development programs. For example, again, in Kenya, you know, we've been doing surveys with youth who had received vocational training and following up with them for years afterwards to find out how that's actually impacted their lives. Are they currently in work? How much are they earning? Et cetera, et cetera. So often with what we would look at in an NGO world is, you know, okay, for 3 years, what's happened? But this, the value for money that this brings allows us to sort of follow these people further down their lives to see how it's really impacted. And as I mentioned again, just that value for money aspect of things, the fact that doing things via mobile, which if you try to replicate them through traditional methods, just would not be feasible and possible from a budgetary point of view. So I think that's something else that sort of comes into the equation.
Great, thank you, Jocelyn, and thank you, Scott. I think you've done a really good job of answering all the questions, and thank you for a very clear presentation. If there are no more questions, and I can't see any more.
I think there was one other question that came in.
Was there one? Aha, did I miss it?
Yeah, it's what advantage does this application really have that others do not have? What is the real difference? Okay. It's a great question, and we really appreciate it. So the applications, and because there are several, including SMS, live calls, mobile web, app, face-to-face interviews, and IVR, which is robocalling. These are all various mobile approaches, and some in person, that give an opportunity for a client to engage their populations, whether it's their beneficiaries or larger populations, in various ways. So there are many companies that may offer an internet-based surveying methodology, and those are wonderful, and they can access information very quickly. However, they do not offer that access down to people that do not have a smartphone and do not have internet access. Doing live calls is fine. Setting up live call centers can be very, very helpful, and what that offers, of course, is the ability to talk to populations that may be illiterate or have questions that are a little bit more complicated than that can be put into an SMS format. SMS is a great tool when answering quantitative surveys, but not ideal for longer surveys or with heavy, long, open-ended kinds of questions. When you're looking for quick data, very efficiently, very cost-effectively, SMS does. What I'm basically saying is that we offer a series of different modes in order to accommodate what you're looking for, the populations you're trying to stay in touch with or engage, and that is the difference. And let me add one additional piece. SMS two-way surveys is not something that a lot of organizations can offer. We can do that, and this is a very unique aspect. We can do that because we've built relationships with about 85 mobile network operators. These are the mobile companies across the globe, covering about 50 countries. So many countries we have access to numerous MNOs, as we call it, and access to those telephone operating firms allow us several important things that you can't do without having those existing relationships. One, access to their mobile subscriber databases. So you don't have to bring your own database. We have databases in the millions, and at any point we can answer a particular country and give you an idea of that scale. The second thing is it allows us to do the two-way SMS at no cost to receive the survey or to complete the survey. And thirdly, and Jocelyn touched on this, is the ability to offer an instant top-up on their SIM card or in their phone credit once they complete the survey. Again, this is not something that one can do without having those existing relationships. I hope that answered your question, Hamadan.
Great, thank you, Scott. So I think we've answered all the questions now. We've answered all the chat. I don't think I've missed anything now. I would just like again to say thank you very much to our main speaker, Jocelyn from GeoPoll, and also to Scott, who answered the questions very eloquently at the end, and his translation skills. Well done, Scott. I was slightly struggling at one point, so that's good to have you on board. As I said earlier, for those that were a little late joining the call, what happens now is in the next hour, Zoom processes the video which we've been recording of the webinar, including all the questions, and sends that to me. I will send that link on in an email to all of those that registered, and particularly those that attended today, so you can share it with colleagues or view it again. And also we will be uploading it to our YouTube channel. The next webinar we have, just in fact as this one was going on, I thought my June slot had dropped out, but I have somebody else who's taken up the June slots. It'll either be end of June or 2nd or 3rd of July, and that's going to be on protection and safeguarding in humanitarian logistics, so that should be interesting. Keep an eye on your newsletter for details of that. But in the meantime, again, thank you to our speakers. Thank you everybody for attending today. We will say goodbye, take our leave of you, and hope to see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.